Well, thank you for coming and hanging out with us tonight so that I, and to a degree, she has a real job. I don't, but for years, speed reading was what I did. And to an extent, it still is, because I read every day. And there are hardly any subjects I can think of that I like to talk about as much as I like to talk about this. And how we're going to do this, Leanne will join in when we get into some of the technical materials, and she'll also do an exercise with you to show you how your eyes work. So first of all, I'm going to do a little overview, introduction, and then I avoided using the word test because most people freak out with that. This will be a very casual little measured reading. And then I'm going to talk about how the word read I think of as the same thing as code. And then we'll teach you a little bit about something called pacing. And then we'll do a second measured reading. And then you can just ask questions. Meanwhile, as we do the presentation, if you have a really burning question that you think might not get answered if you just sit on your hands, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll deal with that. Well, one of the classic ways to learn to read is to learn, first of all, phonics. A, B, K, all of that. And then you form, you're shown little words, cat, mat, fat, sat, hat. You learn to recognize those as whole words. Then the words get a little longer. And in the beginning, you mostly learn to read out loud. One of the reasons for that is so that the reading teacher can be sure that you're understanding and that you're really not just sitting there half asleep. You're learning how to read. Somewhere in the second grade, you're pretty much told, more often at least, to sit at your desk. Don't point at the words. Bad advice. And don't talk out loud. Don't say the words out loud. And don't move your lips. So what that does is put the words up into your mind. It's called subvocalization. Nobody ever tells you when you're the little guy learning to read that you don't have to do any of that. You can look at a group of words, just as you learn to put the alphabet elements together and make words. You can see several different words, several lines high, see them like that, and interpret what they mean. But that part gets left out because most people don't believe it, or they were never trained in it. So most people read at a rate, by the time you're an adult, you read at a rate that's a little bit more than the rate at which you can talk. And we're going to do a little measured reading right now. You all have a handout. I'm trying to juggle the microphone. I didn't number these, but what I put together in this little sheaf of papers is a collection of articles from the manual, from one of the programs that I wrote. And the one I want you to turn to is called Reading as a Real Life Adventure. Does anybody need a pencil? Oh, good. I would expect a bunch of writers to not need pencils. Okay, if you would, there's a little cup there. I'm going to give you 1 minute. Stop, please. All right, there are 15 there's an average of 15 words per line in that particular article. So what you do is count up the number of lines and multiply by 15. The average reading speed in this country, reading English in all its many forms, for what's considered light academic and includes pleasure reading. The overall average in this country, reading English, is about 180 words a minute. That's a pretty much ballpark average, but that's what it is. And reading at that speed, the average comprehension is about 60%. That means if you consider that there were 100 bits of meaning, something there to understand, then if you're an average reader, you got or understood about 60% of it. For the way that most people read, just a single reading, open up the magazine, start to read, and go down the columns. Open up the book, go to page 1, just read on through. If you read that way and get 180 words a minute with 60% comprehension, on the average, 1 hour later, you will have forgotten half of what you ever stood in the first place. 24 hours later, if you're average, you will remember 10% of the 50% that you ever got after the first hour. That's pretty grim. My guess would be that for people who show up to this kind of place to hear this kind of lecture or participate in this kind of workshop, probably you all read faster than 180 words per minute and or understood more than 60%. Now when you read technical materials, that word per minute rate goes down to about 75 words a minute, with about 45% comprehension. And then after that, the rates of recall are pretty much the same. One of the very subtle messages that gets sent to us from the time we start school, now it's going to sound like I'm giving school a bad rap, and I don't mean to, because that's where we all get as educated as we get. But there's an implication that gets engraved in kids' brains from the very beginning, and that is that when you read, you should read every single word, and you should remember, because you're going to be tested. And I, as the teacher, will decide what it is that you need to know. So you better learn it all so that you can pass the test that I'll give you. And that's a pretty scary message that starts in kindergarten, first grade, and follows you as far as you go in school, and stays with you. One of the things that I introduced to the Evelyn Wood course was the idea of self-directed learning, that you learn to set your own goals for what you'll understand, for what you'll read and what you'll understand and what you'll remember. And how long do you want to retain it, or do you want to integrate it with something else? But you get to decide. You no longer have that internalized teacher that's going to decide how much you need to know and how much is enough. I'd like you to consider that reading language is just code. It's code for meaning. It started who knows when, but back with some of our really far away ancestors, when they started to count things. So numbers were pretty clearly, according to the archaeologists, numbers were the first way that human beings communicated with each other. They had to start to keep track of how often that sun came up, how often the storms came. They kept track of cycles, and so most of it was counting stuff and engraving scratches on rocks and on bark and trees. And then eventually the language came along, and the language, in any language, is simply code for meaning. You should always read for what you don't know. There was some research where researchers found, that most people spend as much time reading about material that they already understand and know. Particularly in technical fields, this happens. Well, I don't know whether particularly, but even in technical fields, they spend as much time reading what they already know and understand as they do reading new material. So when you read a textbook in a field with which you're familiar, you should always just read for what you don't already know, because reading is code. There's what's called a multi-pass strategy, and that is that instead of simply picking up a magazine or picking up a book and starting to read it on page 1, that you really examine the book. In the long run, you will save yourself so much more time. So you pick up the book, for example, you look at the front and the back. If it's got a jacket on it, you read whatever it says on the jacket. See when it was copyrighted. Once in a while, that can prevent you from reading a book if you find that it's too old and that the subject matter is more updated in other work. So you look over the table of contents, you read the introduction, which you just thumb through really fast. No reading, just browsing, looking at the words. And what you can find out in doing that is it on top of what you've already found out by looking the book over thoroughly, you find out whether it's going to be difficult or easy. Has it got a lot of characters? Are they people you're going to like? Are they not? Are their names complicated or simple? Where does it take place? Is there a lot of conversation? Is there a lot of description? Is it well written? You can tell all those things or learn all those things just by browsing through the book. It's really simple. So that's the first pass of the multi-pass strategy. The second one is to go back, and depending on the book or the magazine article or whatever it is that you're going to read, think about how much of a chunk you want to bite off to start with. Do you want to go from the beginning to the end of an article? Or do you want to do in a book a chapter or 2 or 3 chapters or a part that has several chapters in it? And then go through, again, page by page, and just browse, again, but a little slower browse. So you're going to pick up a second layer of information. And then finally, you go back and read. You will then read much more thoroughly, much faster than you ever would have otherwise. Because one of the things you also do in the first and second passes is figure out what you don't need to read. Because inevitably, in any article, in any book, there are going to be parts that are pretty dull, parts that cover material with which you're already familiar. So you don't need to spend a lot of time on those. Next is something called pacing. And that's a really, really key part of learning to read faster. And it's simply the idea that you run your finger or the butt end of a pencil or something underneath the lines in order to get your eyes to move smoothly and back and forth. And Leanne's going to talk to you about that.
So pacing is being able to follow something to guide your eyes down the page. And that can be a book or a magazine, a newspaper column. It's especially useful when you're covering technical material, because sometimes a page in a textbook can look overwhelming with graphs, tables, charts, maybe a picture, and you want to take so much in. But if you're previewing and then you're reviewing, it's nice to be able to follow something just to guide your eyes. And it also keeps you more focused on what you're doing in front of you, so you're not thinking about what you're going to eat for lunch in an hour, or, oh, is your friend going to call you? Or what did you have for breakfast? Are the cats okay at home? So many other things can be going through your head when you're trying to read, that the hand functions, or something else, like she mentioned, maybe a pencil. It can function as a focuser, a tool to focus. I know in my business I read a lot of magazines, a lot of nursing magazines, and I also like to read the paper. So for me, the columns are frequently much more narrow than in a regular book, and I find I can pace really quickly just going like that. And sometimes I have to slow down a little bit, and I'll use another hand form just to guide my eyes down the page. I think on one of your pages that you have a couple of examples. Okay, it's about 3 pages from the end. You see a couple of squares with some diagonal dotted lines. And those are examples of how you can guide your eyes down a page. You can go margin to margin pacing, or rapid pacing is just covering the third part that's in the center, a third of each line that's just in the center. So that can go really fast, and that's especially good for newspapers. And maybe some of you are so seasoned at reading newspaper articles that you realize that the bulk of the story is in the very first paragraph and in the very end. So you can go really fast through the center. So that's about pacing. There are different techniques. The Reader's Edge program teaches different techniques. Some of them are spin-offs from Evelyn Wood, and some are completely different. So you would learn a lot. Is there something else? A circle. I'm blanking out. I'm having a senior moment. What?
Have them roll their eyes and watch them.
Oh, that's right. Okay. If you would look to the person next to you and you guys pair up, we're going to do a little exercise about about noticing how your eyes can follow something. It's how to focus. I haven't done this in a long time. Okay, so if you can face each other, you need to be able to look at your eyeballs. Okay.
Yeah, they just circle their eyes first.
Yeah. So I want one person to go first. Choose which person will go first, to roll your eyeballs around in a circle, and the other person will watch your eyeballs as they go around in a circle. Okay? Okay, now we're going to do the next part of this exercise. Before you switch people, okay, the person who's going to roll their eyeballs is the same person, but the person watching, I want you to use your finger to guide the other person's eyes, kind of slowly around, and have the person, you as the eyeball roller, follow the finger. And you with the finger are going to watch their eyeballs to see if they move any more smoothly or not. Okay, go ahead and try that. Same people. Mm-hmm. So does the person who's rolling their eyeballs feel any different? Do you have the sensation that the movement is smoother? That's a really simple demonstration of how your eyes can behave so differently given a target or a guide. That's a pretty dramatic difference for some people. You said, Georgette, that you even felt dizzy rolling your eyeballs, but it helped to have a focus. Do you ever get the sensation when you're trying to read that there's just too many words on the page? Or when you open a book and you see small print, it's just pretty overwhelming. Yeah. So just having a focus tool can help.
So pacing is one of the universals of any kind of speed reading course. Some of you may have encountered something called a tachistoscope. It's something that flashes groups of words on a screen, and the instructor progressively flashes the words for shorter and shorter time bursts. So, and that's a good way to train you to see groups of words and understand the meaning, because again, it's all code. You're just reading for meaning. Now I can imagine that because this is a group of writers, the question may come up about, yeah, but I really love the language. And so when I read, I want to savor the language. Well, the answer to that is pretty simple. If I have a bicycle, there's a top speed beyond which I can't go. Usually, especially at my age, there's a limit to how fast I can walk. But if I have a Maserati, I can go very fast. When I want to, or when I'm in a neighborhood, though, I can go 5 miles an hour, go 1 mile an hour. So the analogy there is that if I want to read something for the way that it's written, or if I want to read poetry, for example, and I like to do that, or if something is really complicated and I'm tired and it's necessary that I understand what I'm reading, no matter how complicated it is, I can slow down. It's just the range of options that you have. So if you love to savor words, and you're that, that throbbing heart writer, don't hesitate to learn to read fast, because it won't ever impair your ability to read slowly. Well, there are a lot of things that are code. Photographs and paintings are code for meaning. Movies are codes. They're all over. Reading is just one kind of code. It's a kind of code that particularly brings to which you have to bring yourself and all the things that you know in order to add that information. One of the primary ways that people learn is through association. And you can call it a lot of names, but it's basically the idea that you add new information to the degree and to the depth that you already have information. It's through association. Like, oh yeah, that reminds me of, like if you're reading things about color, you have to know the basic colors first, and so then you just add more. And I would imagine music is, again, another analogy to that. All right. So pacing. One of the questions that comes up, you start talking about moving something along the lines, is, oh yeah, but would I always have to do that? If I begin to do that, then will I always have to, people will stare at me if I do. They might. I think they would much less now than they did 40 years ago, or 50, but they might. And if that pleases them to do that, then why interfere with that? But it's why, one of the reasons why a lot of people want to use the butt end of a pencil or a retracted pen. And that works very well. Any kind of an implement. The idea is to get your vision to go across the lines and down. And do it, if you did nothing more, I don't know whether this is true or not, but somebody I respected a lot once said this and used to say it regularly when he taught. Because he claimed to have read an article that kind of said this. If you did nothing more from tonight onward except pace, under lines that you want to read, and just consistently, religiously do that, your reading speed would increase about 10% every 6 months. And I don't know what in the world the ceiling would be on that. But that's the idea. Because what Leanne had you do with the not making a circle, just making eyes, most of us think that our eyes move smoothly. Like if I look from you to you, I have the sense that that's a smooth move, and my eyes just go, but they don't. Never have. I didn't realize it till I started to teach this stuff. And the fact is that you have something called saccadic motion, S-A-C-C-A-D-I-C. And it's jerky. The motions fast, really fast, from looking at you, Georgette, to looking at you, would go like that, only lightning fast. But I have the sense that they're moving smoothly. Now, the truth is that in every approximately, here I go with numbers again, but in approximately 100 words of writing, of text, your eyes will look up and down. In addition to the saccadic motion, your eyes will be drawn to words that are italicized, bold-faced, underlined, names, dirty words, emotion words, and they'll stick. They'll stick. And you cannot read fast enough. See, because you lose concentration when that happens. Slows you down. And any time another little thought can get into the wedge that gets made by those by the eyes hopping around and being drawn to certain words or photos or pictures on the page, then you have time, like Leanne pointed out, you have time for your busy, busy mind to start thinking about what you're going to have for dinner or what you had for lunch, or whether you mailed the letter, or, you know, all these other things. Now, consider that when you're driving, for example, think of all the things that occupy your mind, and you still have mind to spare when you're driving. If you're out on the freeway, or even on a street, but freeway is a good example, you've got to look in the mirror, keep steering right, keep your foot on the gas pedal, be prepared to brake. Maybe you're listening to the radio, or you've got somebody in the car with you, and they're talking at you, and you have to think. And now we've got phones and text messaging and all those little interruptions. And I understand now you can get videos, and we have the what do you call the little things that tell you where you're going? GPS. Yeah, GPS things. Your mind manages all of that. Now, we're told that multitasking is a myth. You do not think of 6 things at once, not even 2. You've got some things like the physical, the foot on the gas pedal, the steering. It's kind of like automatic pilot. But what's actually happening is that you have this amazing array of interruptive thoughts that are managing all of that. Okay? Now think with me to when you sit down, just you and a book, and you read at a rate a little somewhere close to the rate at which you speak. You've got so much mind space. The single most common thing that I've ever heard people say as a reason for why they can't read fast is because they can't concentrate. Now what that means is that most people read so slowly that there's all that space for interruptive thoughts to intrude. And that's why most people read slowly. It's one of the major reasons. So, one of the things that happens when you are using a pacer, particularly with your finger, or because I do that too, is that it adds tactility to the process of reading. You're actually touching the page, you're touching the words, and it makes a difference. It really makes a difference. Even if you're just using the butt end of a pen, still it's contact with the page, and it makes a measurable difference. 2 or 3? 1. I think it's the page before the propaganda article starts. There's a whole article there about pacing. But all you need to look at is just this one that has the little boxes up at the top. And what I want you to do is, when I'm going to pace you and say line, 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 and then I'm going to speed it up and go line till I get like line, 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 and then I'm going to slow it down, speed it up, and all you'll do is underline each line and then quickly return, just like an old typewriter carriage. Remember those? You go. Okay. And then if you are so disposed, like a couple people who have had a speed reading course before, if you want to go to simply underlining the middle third of each line, you can do that too. The main thing is that I want you to do the underlining and make your eyes be aware. Use peripheral vision as much as you can, but be aware of the entire line. Okay? Now we're going to do that, and then when you've gotten to the bottom of the page, you can turn the page and continue to exercise on the second page, or you can just go to the top of the page and do it again. Because this is not reading. This is exercising your eyeballs. That's all. And if you can remember that it's not reading, it's just exercise, that frees you up to not worry about comprehension, because there is no test. No test. Okay, now you can even turn the page upside down. Doesn't make any difference. All you're learning is a mechanical thing called pacing. Okay, so I'm going to start. Line, 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 and stop. What was that like?
Fast.
Pardon?
Fast.
Fast. Hmm? No, you can't. And that's exactly why you have to do it. Because you can't subvocalize and do that. And there's the brain is really miraculous. I mean, I'm sure you already know that. Don't need me to show up and tell you. But what's miraculous about this pacing thing and getting you to go to look at print, it's a simple mechanical thing. You simply begin to look at print at a rate so fast that you can't subvocalize anymore. Now, there's a caveat to that. You will always subvocalize occasional words. Some of the dirty words, your own name, something that has a lot of emotional kick to it. You still will just like trip over those and subvocalize them to some degree. Yeah, but you need to keep doing it until, well, where I was going is to talk about how miraculous the brain is. You will not be able to keep pacing and not comprehending. Every time you read, if you do maybe 1 minute of really fast, underlining faster than you can read, and then slow down and just pace. Go at whatever rate you need to go to understand, crack the code, to understand what you're looking at.
So my question is, are you suggesting that my eyes can recognize a word that they don't stop on?
Yes. Yes, because what your brain will do is say, I'm really tired of doing this and not understanding what I'm looking at. And it will begin to understand. It will begin to recognize words. And if you go slowly enough, go fast for a minute, just to get them moving smoothly. Then go back and go as slowly as ever you need to, but pace. Keep yourself from having your eyes hop up and down and sideways and back. It's called regression, and it happens at least 11 times per 100 words. Don't have to. You were taught to. You were taught to. You can teach yourself a new way. Trust me, the mind gets bored pretty easily too. You've heard the term monkey mind?
Sure.
Yeah. You start to get monkey mind, and then what you want to do is go back and just keep pacing. Bored easily too. The term mind. Start to get monkey. The thing that enables people to see several lines deep and several words wide is that your brain is perfectly capable of seeing a grouping of words and understanding the meaning out of normal expectancy order. Language has structure, and a pretty tight structure. Name a language, and that language, all language has structure. So you can read things out of normal expectancy order, because if you look at a word that's like 10 letters long, and the first letter and the last letter are where they ought to be, the rest, it doesn't matter as long as the other letters are in there. Your brain goes, poof, understands it. You need to trust your brains more. Oh, the fact is that if you read faster than you speak, you are already looking at words like a, and, them, those, because this goes along with the idea that your brain is really a miraculous organ. Your brain, if you're a frequent reader, a voracious reader, your brain has looked at those simple connective words so many times, it doesn't bother to subvocalize those. So you're already a speed reader, because you don't have to subvocalize those words. So all you need to really do is expand on what you're already doing. All right, let's do the line thing again. So you start at the beginning of the article again. line, 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 and stop. Was that easier that time? A little bit. Well, that's what you build, is peripheral vision. That's a side effect. Trust me, you will get very tired, your brain gets very tired of reading your fingers. It won't do it, so it'll reach out to the words and the meaning. It's as simple as that. It's kind of a mindless exercise to do that, to pace. But if you will do it, but if you'll do it, you will read faster. Your brain will make you do it. Okay, now let's go back to that article, Reading as a Real Life Adventure. And I had you place a mark where you finished. So that's where I want you to start.
Start where they finished last?
Yep. Start where you finished last. And read again for 1 minute. Ready? Begin. So how many of you read faster the second time? Voila. Pardon? That's another thing. You should learn well, and I left that out the first time, so I didn't do it the second time. Learn to give yourself a grade. You know, if you set out to learn a particular thing and you read, decode the writing, and you got what you intended to get, plus probably a few things that you didn't even anticipate, then give yourself an A. Be a self-directed learner.
I'm an A+. It's me.
All right. All right. Most people who seriously pursue reading faster say that they feel smarter than they ever have. Some of us who taught the Evelyn Wood course and used to do classroom presentations with it realized after a few years of teaching that to a large degree we were teaching wounded people who for one reason or another had been led to believe they weren't very smart, either because they had a little bit of dyslexia. Now, learning to read fast will not cure a really serious case of dyslexia, but it will clear up, will immeasurably help counteract kind of light to medium dyslexia, simply because it teaches people to look at the little squiggles that are our language in a different way. But a lot of it was just people like, well, I remember when I was in the 4th grade, last half of the 4th grade, I decided I was going to learn a new word in the dictionary every day. And I was stupid enough to go tell my teacher. And she, in turn, after recess that day, told the whole class, and she laughed. And so they all laughed. So then I got teased for days. Like, oh, new word, what new word did you learn today? You know, just real mean bully stuff. So of course I never learned a new word every day. Fortunately, I learned enough so I have a reasonably good vocabulary. But that's the kind of nonsense that led people sometimes to sign up for a reading course. Still does have that same effect. People feel wounded somehow in their learning capability. And when they found that they could read faster and learn and give themselves an A+, it made a huge difference in their self-regard, self-esteem. Mrs. Wood was an English teacher. She was an English teacher in a small town south of Salt Lake City, because she and her husband Doug lived there. I think they were both born there, raised there, lived there. She taught high school. And boy, let's see, how can I shorten this story? She was dedicated. She was really an avid educator. She insisted, once the company was formed, that she and Doug went to Europe. They were Mormons. And when in the 1930s, and when Hitler began to march, they were told, Doug was told, that he had to come back to the United States. It would be too dangerous to stay in Europe. So Evelyn invented a note-taking system, which is, I mean, you've seen the diagrammatic ways of taking notes. I mean, I've got it in my book, because it's a really good system. It clusters information. She put everything that they had been there teaching to Mormon people in classes, she put it all in these things she called recall patterns. And they came back home, and she began working on a master's degree in English at the University of Utah. She used as her students in testing things, particularly girls who were at junior level high school in this little school where she taught. And she used speed reading as the topic for her master's thesis. John F. Kennedy, who was president at the time, you've probably heard this story partly. He read about it, and he was a natural speed reader. There are folks who just know how to do this. Not a lot, but she managed to find 50 of them, and a story got written about what she was doing. Kennedy read it and said, "Bring her back here," because he was always passing out piles of stuff to his cabinet and the other people who worked around him and for him. And they didn't read. They didn't read the stuff, and then he would have to keep being polite to him. But he was really irritated that they couldn't read the stuff he gave them. So he had Evelyn go back and teach him, and then that got publicized. Well, Doug and Evelyn didn't have a whole lot of money, but some really rich New York guys with a lot of money said, "This is going to be a way to make money. This little lady can teach courses." And so she and Doug never owned the company. They owned the franchise for Utah and Idaho and eventually a couple of other states, but that was it. I mean, even if, no matter how fast you learn to read, you'll always have a drop-off after an hour and a bigger drop-off after 24 hours. You always will. I don't know how to get around that. But the brain is like a muscle. It gets better if you exercise it. And speed reading does exercise your brain. Yeah, or you can sit and mumble to yourself, and that does absolutely reinforce it. It's why I have a whole chapter on recall patterns in the book, and that's that diagrammatic way of taking notes. But when you first start to read, if it's something that you're going to really be accountable for, like if you're studying or or you just want to really, really remember, then making a recall pattern is a really, taking notes, in other words, it is a really good way to improve your comprehension and improve your retention. By expanding on some of the rationale that I've talked about tonight, like the fact that we use so little of our brain capacity when we read the way that we read, the old way. You absolutely occupy more, exercise more of your mind. And it's usually exciting with kids or with anybody who's not a good reader and who's fidgety. I had one of those. She's got 2 little brothers, and the older one was just always, something on him was moving all the time. And we didn't even know about the newly labeled kinds of things. But I'm convinced now that he had that. He had one of those. And he's still,
He's very fidgety.
He's very fidgety.
He's an award-winning journalist now.
Yeah, so, he turned it to good use. But you expand. I mean, those are the kinds of students, some of them, the students like we used to get. And you appeal to the fact that they can do it. And it's kind of a no-brainer to just say, just do this. Look material over before you read it, then look it over again, and then pace when you read. If you don't do anything more than that, you will learn to read faster. And even kids can get that. And part of it is for somebody who's fidgety is the tactility, the movement. Really helps usually to be able to. Also, every language has structure that's intrinsic just to that language. It's like some languages, all the sentences will start with the noun, and then there'll be modifiers, and then there'll be a verb, and there's a regular order to that. English is a hodgepodge. It's why it's one of the most difficult languages in the world to learn. But it definitely has structure, so much so that there was some research done some years ago about people who read scripts, like people on television who are reading a monitor, or people who are on the radio and reading a script. Well, I guess now they're reading a monitor too. But even if a sentence or a thought was cut off, that on the average, they knew the meaning of the next 8 to 10 words.
Yes.
Don't you, though, sometimes, if you're listening to an interview and one or the other, the interviewer or the interviewee, hesitates, pauses, you could finish the sentence for them. Does that happen to you? Yeah. In fact, this is just an evidence of of language structure. Well, how that applies to reading is that as you read, you don't need to see all the words in what would be normal, whatever that is, expectancy order. You can see a jumble of words and understand the meaning. Yeah?
I apologize for
No, probably not. Remember I used the analogy of the Maserati? If I have, well, the car that I have says I can go 140 miles an hour, I think. And I think I probably could if I were up, in the desert. But I can also just creep like 1 mile an hour. Yeah. I don't know. We've got a sign at the entry to our complex that says 10 miles an hour. And I slow down and do that. It's the difference between somebody who just is limited by not being able to read over, say, 200-300 words a minute, and somebody who is a speed reader, can read, hundreds of words a minute. Variable speed. I mean, you don't just go through a whole book. You go fast and then slow. And during the multipass strategy, you decide maybe There are parts you don't even need to read because you already know all that. Or you see, oh man, this is that complicated part. I need to catch this dialogue, so you slow down. And you speed up when it gets to some other part. It's variable speed reading. Or you're reading at a variety of speeds. You don't just open a book and read everything at the same speed.